Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we're back with another React video, and today we're going to be finishing Extra Histories series on the history of paper money. This should be a lot of fun, but before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to the newest channel member. Hi Peri, yeah, he's right over there too. Thank you to Hayden Duke for becoming a channel member, and if any of you want to become a channel member, you can do so by clicking the link in the description box below. We also have had a lot of lapsed channel members who have decided to hop back on. I really do appreciate that. That's really cool. What else? Oh, we have a poll. Check the community tab because we're going to be deciding on the next handful of extra history videos we're going to be doing. So if you want to have your voice heard, go to my channel, click that little tab that says community, and you'll be able to participate in that poll. So yeah, I think that's about it. Now let's get into the main video. Alrighty, so today we're going to be doing the episode called The Gold Standard. But like a lot of things in this series, it's already introduced us to the concept of the gold standard, and they teased that we're going to be talking about getting off of the gold standard, going into our more modern, very abstract economy, which I think this has been a whole lot of fun. Economic history, it appeals to me, just like geography. I'm not great at it. I don't feel like I have the instinct to really make everything click perfectly when they explain something to me, but I find it really fun. So that's why I'm very excited to go further down this rabbit hole, and we're going to be doing the South Sea Bubble episode or series thing after this one, and then we're going to be doing whatever is the victor in the poll on the community tab. So let's get this started, guys. I'm hyped.
In this series, we rarely get far into the 20th century because it's hard to have historical perspective on events that are that close to our own time. But today, we're going to have to roar into the latter half of the 20th century to show you just how recently this idea came to be. This idea that seems so normal, that we all take for granted as if it were always the case. The idea that money is worth something because we all agree it is.
I guess, yeah, in a sense, paper money is worth something because we all agree it is a slightly newer concept. But we did have kind of that principle, but just kind of applied to other things. If you talk about hard currency, there is a certain joint faith that goes into that. So the principle is still there. It's just being firmly pushed the next step down the line, where we take something that we have and can have an overabundance of, and it somehow still manages to have a sort of value.
Last time, we talked about the growth of central banks as a patch system to fix the numerous problems that occur when you introduce paper money as the basis for an economy. But for many people, one more step was required to really inspire confidence in this idea of taking milled tree bark in return for their labor, and that was the gold standard. The gold standard is basically the idea that your paper money is backed in gold, that at any time you could take your paper bills somewhere and redeem them for a specified amount of gold. Now, I hear a lot of you say, why would you ever do that? Doesn't putting a currency on the gold standard just mean that we're back to the problem we were trying to solve in the first place? By tying money to gold, aren't we once again limiting the money supply? The short answer to that is yes, and we're going to see just how that plays out. The longer answer is, sort of. This is a pretty complicated economic question, too complex to really get into here, but the concise version is that having paper money backed in gold, rather than using gold directly, allows far more options when you need to expand the money supply. And it has the advantage of letting you play fast and loose with the system when you need to. But
it's such a universally recognized, valuable item, I guess, gold is. At this point, its value is incredibly backed. So I guess if you're going to have your economy backed by anything, I suppose that would be it. I know while a lot of countries are off the gold standard right now, we're kind of in the stage where we have, in a lot of ways, moved beyond that. I know a lot of people who still kind of sing the praises of the gold standard because, yeah, there's definitely a certain consistency that comes from that. I understand every system's gonna have its positives and its negatives, but I can kind of understand why the gold standard has its fans.
But still, why would you do this rather than have your currency float free? Well, that's where history comes in. You see, the gold standard solves two major problems. The first is inflation. As you can probably guess, it wasn't long after people started printing paper money that they figured that they could just print a lot of paper money. Way more paper money than they could ever redeem. Way more than even our fractional reserve banking system thinks is sane. As soon as people did that, you started to get inflation. And it could still happen even with a central currency controlled by the government, because when countries needed to, say, pay for an army, they would sometimes just print more bills to do it. More bills means that each bill is worth less, which was a problem, not only for those poor citizens whose life savings were now in paper bills, but also for other countries who'd been accepting those paper bills in exchange for their goods, which...
In a way, it seems like the gold standard is more a check on the people at the top than the people at the bottom, which I think is really interesting. It kind of provides a stability that can span generations. You might have somebody who understands money in an abstract way in charge one time, but then the next person in charge might be all for the printing of paper money, and that might not work out that well. So actually tying it to this system forces a degree of frugality in that. So like I get that. I see the appeal. Though I'd hope that people today are able to responsibly manage an economy without that kind of holding them down. But, a lot of people aren't.
Brings us to the second major issue that the gold standard addresses: exchange rates. Right as paper money was becoming the standard in Europe, international trade was really starting to pick up. The Industrial Revolution was getting into full swing, and raw materials and finished goods had to be shipped and traded at a pace never before seen. Simultaneously, mercantilism, that isolationist monetary policy that we discussed in an earlier episode, is coming to an end, causing trade to rocket to even greater heights. But what happens when your ship full of cargo docks in some foreign port, and you try to hand the local merchant your funny green paper money to buy their goods, while they try to hand you their funny pink paper money to buy what you've got on your ship? Well, you both just sit there scratching your heads for a while. Back in the day, you would have just weighed whatever coins they were trying to give you and accept them for their weight in gold. But now they're handing you this piece of paper that you don't recognize and you have no idea how to value. I mean, can you even trade this specific piece of paper for anything when you get back home? But if both currencies are on the gold standard, problem solved. Just as an example, let's say that at any time, you could turn in $20 to get 1 ounce of gold. 1 ounce of gold is what your $20 are worth. Now, let's say you sail to England, where, for the sake of keeping things simple, the UK has set their gold standard so that an ounce of gold is worth 2 British pounds. This makes everything nice and simple. Since you're both operating on the gold standard, that means 1 British pound is the equivalent in value to 10 US dollars. Done and done, simple. So how...
It seems to make all the sense in the world. I think a lot of modern economics, a lot of the approach, and a lot of it is so hard for me to personally grasp, but a lot of it feels a little bit more abstract. And I think that's probably one of the better ways of working with it. There's a lot of invisible, not just, I don't want to just say money, but there's a lot of invisible entities that are kind of like complicating our economy and stuff, and like this kind of brings it back down to earth a little bit before it gets really crazy. So like, yeah, okay.
How does this all fall apart? Well, first we have to talk about how it all began. If you saw our episodes on the First Opium War, remember how we talked about the fact that all of Britain's silver was flowing into China to buy tea? Well, to solve all the problems I just talked about, the British were looking for some commodity to back the Bank of England notes with. But with all their silver gone, the British chose gold, and soon basically everybody followed suit. But this system had its own breaking points. Absolute adherence to the gold standard had to be suspended several times during the 1800s due to the massive expenses incurred by international war. But in England, as in most other countries, there was always a return to the gold standard in peacetime, with countries working to build their gold reserves back up and limiting the printing of further notes.
Yeah, the limitation, when you do bring it back down to earth, it doesn't exactly work as well in times of struggle and crisis. I guess that is one of the strengths of a modern economic system. Some are, it may feel like that is irresponsible, and there may be irresponsible elements to it. If you are one who fears debt and such, an abstract economy knows how to really accrue debt. Many modern economists argue that debt isn't as much of a problem as it is often made out to be. But there are still those who deeply fear like a national debt and stuff like that, and really want to avoid deficits and that sort of stuff. So I guess in that sense, they would probably like a more gold standard type system and less abstract economic activity.
Other minor shocks, like the California gold rush and other introductions of massive new sources of gold, would cause the system to lurch, but overall, use of the gold standard held up pretty well throughout the 19th century. Then came World War I, the seminal catastrophe, the shatterer of so many notions from our past. And like so many other things, the gold standard crumpled under the impossible needs of the war. Nation after nation abandoned gold to print more money to pay for the arms, munitions, and men that were being expended daily on the field. And as more and more money was printed and spent to feed the insatiable hunger of this war, trade became erratic. Trade from the United States grew far beyond what the gold reserves of Europe could bear. Inflation ran rampant, and after the war, many countries couldn't drag themselves back to the gold standard. Some nations, like Germany, who were spiraling into hyperinflation under the crushing debt of war reparations, tried to stabilize their currency by backing it in land rather than gold. Others, like England, appealed to people's patriotism and wrenched...
I mean, that's an interesting idea. The German recovery after World War I, like that's a damn near impossible thing to come back from, and it's not surprising that extreme ideology ends up coming out of that, because the amount of the amount they were expected to pay was absolutely ridiculous, and you understand why people wanted them to pay that, because a lot of chaos came out of all this. A lot was lost in the process, but like cracking down on a country too hard, as we've come to learn, has brought a lot of ideologies that would have otherwise been on the fringe to the forefront. So then we got World War II, man. It's how it be sometimes.
Themselves back onto the gold standard by asking people not to redeem their money for gold just out of love of country. But even this fell apart as the Great Depression hit. Those few countries that had the wherewithal to stay on the gold standard, like the United States, were now hamstrung by how the inflexibility of gold prevented them from reacting to the crisis. And yet, many people and many nations thought of this as a temporary hiccup. Sure, the war and the Depression had made a mess of things, but soon the good times would be back. Things would get sorted out, and everybody would get back on the gold standard. I mean, they had to, right? Without the gold standard, how is money worth anything? But those good times didn't have a chance to come back, because then came the big one, World War II.
Oh, no.
World War II was perhaps the most expensive war in history. Economically, it was totally unsustainable, with the US racking up enormous trade surpluses and every other country involved sinking into massive debt. But the world had learned from World War I, and as World War II wound down, many of the major powers met to work out the first real international monetary agreement, the famous Bretton Woods system. You see, following the First World War, Britain had owed the US a huge pile of money, which they couldn't pay back unless France paid them a huge pile of money it owed them. But much of the war had occurred on French soil, and the French couldn't afford to pay back the British unless they basically made the defeated Germans pay for everything. This, of course, had all been a disaster that caused huge financial and political instability. So this time around, things would be different. reparations would be minimized, repayment of reparations would be on gentler terms, and that whole problem of wildly unstable currency caused by countries like Germany no longer being able to adhere to the gold standard after World War I, this time the currency instability problem would be solved. And how would it be solved? Well, at this point in history, the US basically had everybody's gold, because everybody had bought a ton of stuff from the US for the two biggest wars in history. So
our position was rather interesting. The world wars, while we tend to focus a little bit more on World War II here than World War I, in general, the world wars were not as much American conflicts. We came in after like a lot of the action was already done for a lot of them. Of course, we played a significant role in World War II, and a lot of those actions ended up pretty much defining the next generation that would come. But I think sitting on the sideline, that economically, the U.S. was able to do rather well. But now, after World War II, we never found a war we didn't like. We don't even really know what it's like to sit on the sideline and see what that could do for our economy anymore. We're always in conflict somewhere.
the US actually was still on the gold standard. So the solution was simple. Peg everybody else's currency to the US dollar. That's right, the system essentially boiled down to the US dollar is redeemable in gold, and all other currencies are redeemable in US dollars. And so every country had to keep some dollars on hand to redeem their currency, which is how the US dollar became the reserve currency for basically the entire world. As other nations' economies recovered, the dollar became overvalued. This came to a head in 1965. Charles de Gaulle, who had always been a little bit miffy about America's position in the world, decided that he was going to act on that redeemability. So he sent the French Navy to cash in and pick up his bullion, literally bringing boatloads of gold back to France. Soon, other nations followed suit. By 1971, with the dollar still overvalued and the Cold War and wars like Korea and Vietnam draining U.S. resources and sending U.S. gold overseas, Richard Nixon finally took the step that many argued had to come and took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. Just take that in for a moment. 1971. Less than 50 years ago. But here's where it gets good. When Nixon pulled the U.S. off the gold standard, the shock was felt around the world, but it didn't stop many countries from still pegging their currency to the U.S. dollar. So now you had currencies around the world redeemable for U.S. dollars, and the U.S. dollar pegged to nothing. Soon, many other countries decided just...
That sounds like a terrible idea when you say it exactly how it is. But... like, at this point, it shouldn't be at all surprising since when you get used to valuing something, you kind of accept that it has a value. Like, this is kind of the moral of pretty much this entire series. We've been doing the same thing since episode 1, so it's a lot of the same conversation, just talking about different little units here. We got the US dollar, we could talk about coins, we can talk about shells. It's just like whatever you happen to value. So I feel like I repeat myself, but economics is kind of a repetitive concept. You'll take these older principles, and as everything starts to change and develop or whatever, a lot of those principles will stay the same. They'll just apply to different things. In this case, it's a new form, same old story, really. And that's kind of a fun thing that I find about economic history, because there is some consistency you find from place to place, from time to time.
To let their currencies float, to let them be valued at what the market would bear. And so, just like that, almost by accident, after 6,000 years, we finally accepted money as an idea rather than a thing. Or, as John Law would say, we accepted money as the medium by which things are exchanged, not the value for which they are. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Pretty sick. That was pretty cool. I think that was a really good series. I felt a little more strongly about like the early stuff. I think seeing like the beginning of a lot of these ideas was really, really cool. And as we start getting towards the modern stuff, I admittedly did not have as much to say, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. I think it was really cool. I felt like I was just kind of taking it in a lot for this one. So next we're going to be doing the South Sea Bubble. The poll that I put on the community tab will determine the next handful. I don't know what's on the poll at the time I'm recording this. I'll have it figured out by the time the video comes out, though, so that'll be a thing. So South Sea Bubble, I know it has something to do with... There was definitely slave trade elements involved in that. But I believe that's like early 1700s, so I'm going to definitely need a little bit of context on that before I can really talk about it. But I'm excited because it's getting close to the stuff that I study, and it's definitely going to give a little bit more context to the state of I believe it gives context to like the state of the British Empire, right? Like this is straight up British imperial stuff. So yeah, and it's something that kind of relates to a lot of the stuff that I'm studying right now. I'm in a class about Atlantic history, which a lot of it is British and Spanish Empire, but there are other elements. There's a lot in Africa that you can study, a lot of Native American history, North and South. So there's so much there. So I'm very excited to see where that series brings me. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was really cool. I'm going to keep doing more extra history stuff. And pretty soon we'll have the new schedule laid out. I'll give you guys until I finish the South Sea Bubble series on that poll, so you'll have plenty of time to get your answers in. So don't give up too early if the one you picked is a little bit behind. There's going to be a lot of time for them to catch up, but we'll see. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, become a channel member, get a shirt, a sticker, whatever you want to do, yo. And I will see you guys next time. All right.